We often picture Sun Tzu merely as a hardened general surrounded by maps and weapons, but in reality, he was a profound philosopher who studied the deepest cracks in human nature long before he ever studied battlefield tactics. He realized very early on that the chaotic violence of war was simply a tragic amplification of the everyday failures in human communication, greed, fear, and the desperate ego-driven desires of rulers who lacked true wisdom. Before he ever wrote about formations or terrain, he spent years silently observing how easily people are triggered by their emotions, how quickly they abandon reason when frightened, and how predictably they act when they want something desperately. His true genius wasn't in inventing new ways to kill, but in understanding that if you can comprehend the psychological machinery that drives a human being, you can control the outcome of any situation without needing brute force. He viewed humanity not as soldiers on a chessboard to be sacrificed, but as complex emotional beings driven by invisible currents of desire and fear that a wise person could navigate like a skilled sailor reads the wind. Sun Tzu understood that the greatest generals were not those with the strongest arms, but those with the deepest empathy, allowing them to step into the shoes of their adversary and feel exactly what they are feeling. To him, the study of war was actually the study of peace, because only by fully understanding the horrific costs and unpredictable nature of conflict could a true leader be motivated to do everything possible to avoid it. He recognized that the seeds of victory are not planted when the drums beat for charge, but are sown years earlier in the character development of the leader and the disciplined culture of the society they govern. The art of war was never meant to be a glorification of bloodshed. It was a philosophical warning label written by a man who had seen too much suffering and wanted to provide a path away from destruction. Ultimately, Sun Tzu was a student of the Tao, the natural way of the universe, believing that human conflict arises when we resist the natural flow of things and try to force outcomes through ego and aggression. It sounds incredibly contradictory to the modern ear, but Sun Tzu's most profound insight was that the moment you actually engage in physical battle, you have already failed strategically, regardless of whether you win or lose the fight. He argued that true excellence is not about winning every single battle you fight, but rather about subduing the enemy's army without ever having to fight them at all, which is the pinnacle of strategic wisdom. For Sun Tzu, war is like a massive, uncontrollable fire. Once it is ignited, it consumes resources, destroys lives, bankrupts the state, and creates deep-seated resentments that will inevitably lead to future conflicts down the road. He believed that even a victorious army suffers immense damage, comparing it to a sword that has been used too many times. It eventually becomes dull, brittle, and useless, no matter how skilled the swordsman wielding it might be. The highest form of generalship is to attack the enemy's plans and alliances, breaking their psychological will to fight before their soldiers ever have a chance to march out of their encampments and onto the field. If you are forced to fight, it means your diplomatic efforts have failed, your intelligence gathering was insufficient, and you were unable to maneuver your opponent into a position where surrender was their only logical option. He taught that prolonged warfare is the greatest disaster that can befall a nation, as it drains the treasury, exhausts the people, and leaves the state vulnerable to internal rebellion and external attacks from other opportunistic neighbors. A truly wise strategist knows that the best victory is one that is achieved so subtly and smoothly that the general public doesn't even realize a major conflict was just averted, bringing no glory but immense stability. Sun Tzu viewed the use of direct military force as a desperate last resort, similar to how a skilled doctor would view amputation, necessary only when the disease has progressed too far for any other remedy to work. Therefore, the entire philosophy is built around the idea of preservation, preserving your own state, preserving your army, and even preserving the enemy's state whenever possible. Because destruction is easy, but rebuilding is incredibly difficult. Sun Tzu recognized centuries before modern psychology that the most critical terrain of any conflict is not the mountains or the rivers, but the landscape of the human mind, both yours and your opponent's. Before a single arrow is loosed, a war is already being fought in the realm of morale, perception, fear, and the collective willpower of the people and the soldiers who are being asked to risk their lives. He taught that if you can manipulate your enemy's perception of reality, making them see strength where you are weak and weakness where you are strong, they will inevitably make catastrophic mistakes based on false assumptions. The wise commander spends more time waging psychological warfare than physical warfare, spreading rumors to sow discord among the enemy's generals and creating doubts in the minds of their soldiers about the righteousness of their cause. If you can make the enemy general angry, arrogant, or terrified, you have already won half the battle because an emotional mind is incapable of making rational, calculated strategic decisions under pressure. Sun Tzu emphasized the importance of self-knowledge, stating famously that if you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles, but if you know neither, you will succumb in every single one. This inner battle involves a brutal honesty about your own limitations, fears, and biases. Because if you lie to yourself about your capabilities, reality will eventually deliver a devastating correction on the battlefield. He believed that discipline is not just about following orders, but about cultivating a mental fortitude that allows an army to remain calm and centered even when chaos and death are erupting all around them. The ultimate goal of this mental preparation is to arrive at the battlefield with a mind as clear and reflective as still water, able to respond instantly to changing circumstances without being clouded by preconceived notions. Victory is achieved when your opponent's mind is defeated. When they become convinced that fighting is futile, their physical weapons become useless, regardless of how many they possess. The highest level of Sun Tzu's philosophy is the art of deception and subtlety, where you maneuver your opponent into a position of inevitable defeat, without them ever realizing a conflict has taken place until it is too late. He famously stated that all warfare is based on deception, meaning you must constantly present a false reality to your opponent, never letting them know your true intentions, capabilities, or ultimate objectives. This approach requires extreme patience, moving slowly and deliberately like water eroding a rock, making small, seemingly insignificant adjustments that cumulatively lead to a massive strategic advantage over time. You must learn to appear unstructured and formless, so the enemy has nothing solid to attack, while you simultaneously probe for their fixed structures and rigid patterns to find their points of vulnerability. Sun Tzu advised that when you are capable, you must feign incapacity. When you are active, you must appear inactive. And when you are near to the enemy, you must make it seem as if you are far away. The goal is to encourage your opponent's arrogance and carelessness by feeding them small, calculated victories, making them overconfident, and leading them into a trap of their own making. By the time the enemy realizes they have been outmaneuvered, their alliances should be broken, their supply lines cut, their morale shattered, and their defeat a mathematical certainty rather than a bloody contest. This silent victory is achieved by manipulating the environment and the circumstances, so that the enemy defeats themselves through their own reactions to the false information you have provided them. It is the difference between a loud, messy butcher hacking at meat with a cleaver and a master chef surgically separating muscle from bone with a scalpel, achieving the goal with minimal effort and no waste. In this philosophy, the greatest conquerors are those whose names are rarely spoken, because their victories were so smooth and preventive that history never recorded a dramatic crisis for them to solve. Sun Tzu provided a timeless warning to great powers and large empires, cautioning that immense size and strength often breed a dangerous complacency and arrogance that becomes their ultimate downfall. He understood that a large army is slow to move, expensive to feed, difficult to coordinate, and often suffers from poor communication and a lack of unified purpose compared to a smaller, more agile force. The sheer weight of a great power's bureaucracy can paralyze its decision-making process, making it unable to react quickly to the rapidly changing circumstances that define conflict in the real world. Great powers often fall into the trap of fighting distant wars that have little to do with their core national interests, draining their resources and will on conflicts that offer no real strategic gain. Sun Tzu noted that when a state becomes too powerful, its leaders often become detached from the reality on the ground, surrounded by yes-men who tell them what they want to hear rather than the uncomfortable truth. He emphasized that a smaller force, if united in purpose, disciplined in action, and led by wise strategy, can easily frustrate, exhaust, and eventually defeat a much larger but lethargic opponent. The key for the smaller power is to avoid direct confrontation where the enemy's size is an advantage, and instead use guerrilla tactics to strike at their weak points, supply lines, and morale. Sun Tzu's teachings are a constant reminder that hubris is the deadliest enemy of the powerful, and that underestimating a weaker opponent is the quickest path to humiliating defeat. Modern history is littered with examples that validate Sun Tzu's insights, where technologically superior superpowers were baffled and bogged down by smaller, determined forces who refused to fight on their terms. His philosophy teaches that true power is not just about having the biggest stick, but knowing when to use it, when to hide it, and recognizing the inherent limitations of force itself. For Sun Tzu, information was not just supporting data. It was the most lethal weapon in a commander's arsenal, more valuable than thousands of chariots or heavily armed soldiers. He dedicated an entire chapter to the use of spies, arguing that no enlightened ruler or wise general can achieve great things without the subtle use of intelligence networks. For knowledge cannot be gotten from ghosts and spirits, cannot be had by analogy, and cannot be found out by calculation. It must be obtained from people who know the enemy's situation. A wise commander is willing to spend vast sums of gold to acquire information, knowing that the cost of a single spy is infinitely less than the cost of raising and equipping an entire army for a failed campaign. Information allows you to see into the enemy's camp, to know their supplies, the state of their morale, the personalities of their commanders, and the very structure of their strategic thinking. But Sun Tzu also warned of the double-edged nature of information. You must be constantly vigilant against counterespionage and the false information that the enemy is trying to feed you. The ultimate master of information is one who can operate in complete secrecy, keeping their own plans shrouded in darkness, while illuminating every corner of the enemy's operations with the bright light of knowledge. He taught that you must treat your spies with the utmost generosity and sincerity, for if they do not feel valued and secure, they may easily be turned against you by the highest bidder. In the modern world, this translates to the critical importance of cyber intelligence, data analysis, and understanding the information landscape that shapes global events and public opinion. Without reliable information, a leader is like a blind man stumbling in the dark near the edge of a cliff, where a single misstep based on a false assumption can lead to total disaster. Sun Tzu's philosophy was often more threatening to the incompetence of his own side's rulers than it was to the opposing army, because it demanded a level of accountability that few leaders wanted to face. He argued that a general on the battlefield must have absolute authority to make tactical decisions based on the immediate reality, even if it means directly disobeying an order from the sovereign back in the capital. This concept was revolutionary and dangerous in a time of absolute monarchies, implying that wisdom and expertise should trump royal decree when the fate of the nation was on the line. Sun Tzu explicitly stated that there are commands of the sovereign which must not be obeyed, particularly when those commands are based on ignorance of the battlefield conditions and would lead to certain defeat. He criticized rulers who interfered with army operations, comparing them to someone ignorant of music trying to conduct an orchestra, creating chaos and dissonance instead of harmony and effectiveness. His philosophy demanded that leaders put aside their egos, their personal vendettas, and their desire for glory, and instead make cold, rational calculations based solely on the best interests of the state and its people. He warned that a ruler who launches a war out of anger can be soothed, but a kingdom that has been destroyed can never be brought back to life, nor can the dead ever be brought back to life. Sun Tzu set an incredibly high standard for leadership, requiring a combination of intellect, benevolence, courage, and strict discipline that very few historical figures have ever actually managed to embody. By exposing the catastrophic consequences of incompetent leadership, his writings served as a constant, uncomfortable mirror for rulers who preferred flattery over the hard truth about their own limitations. Ultimately, Sun Tzu taught that the greatest danger to a nation often comes not from external barbarians at the gate, but from the foolishness, arrogance, and corruption of those within the palace walls. At the very heart of Sun Tzu's philosophy lies a deeply ethical idea that, if applied honestly by leaders throughout history, would have prevented the vast majority of useless and destructive wars. That idea is the rigorous, unemotional calculus of cost versus benefit, demanding that no war should ever be undertaken unless the strategic gains decisively outweigh the inevitable human and economic losses. Sun Tzu insisted that war is a grave matter of state, a place of life and death, a road to survival or ruin, and therefore it must be examined with the utmost care and never entered into lightly. If leaders truly had to justify the predicted death toll and economic devastation against the likely outcome before declaring war, emotional crusades and ego-driven conquests would vanish overnight. His philosophy strips away the romanticism and glory of warfare, revealing it for what it truly is: a grim, expensive, and highly uncertain business venture that should only be considered when national survival is at stake. He taught that a wise ruler does not raise an army just to vent their anger, and a good general does not engage in battle just to prove their own bravery or seek personal fame. This pragmatic pacifism is not based on moral idealism, but on a cold recognition that even a successful war often leaves the victor weaker and more vulnerable than they were before the conflict began. The application of this idea requires a level of long-term strategic thinking that is rare in human history, where leaders are willing to accept a short-term diplomatic dissatisfaction to avoid a long-term catastrophe. It challenges us to redefine strength not as the willingness to use force, but as the wisdom to restrain from using force until it is the absolutely last remaining option for survival. If the world truly understood Sun Tzu, we would build fewer statues of victorious generals and more monuments to the wise diplomats who prevented battles from ever happening in the first place. Over the millennia, the profound Taoist depth of Sun Tzu's work has often been regrettably flattened and reduced into a superficial collection of catchy quotes and clever tricks for business and politics. We see his profound insights on human nature turned into shallow slogans for corporate retreat PowerPoints, used by managers who want to crush the competition, without understanding the disastrous long-term costs of such a mindset. This reductionist view ignores his central thesis, that fighting is failure, and instead focuses obsessively on the tactical chapters related to deception, maneuvering, and aggressive action. The modern appropriation of Sun Tzu often strips away the essential context of moral imperatives, discipline, and the grave responsibility of leadership that forms the bedrock of his entire philosophical system. By focusing only on the how of winning and ignoring the why of fighting, we create a generation of tactical thinkers who are strategically illiterate and morally adrift. We forget that Sun Tzu wrote during a period of horrific, incessant warfare, and his goal was not to encourage more of it, but to find a rational way to limit its scope and devastating impact on society. Treating the art of war merely as a playbook for getting ahead is like using a complex medical textbook on surgery to learn how to win a knife fight in an alley. It misses the point entirely and is incredibly dangerous. The true depth of the text reveals itself only when we read it not as aspiring conquerors, but as students of human psychology, organizational behavior, and the complex dynamics of conflict resolution. When we reduce Sun Tzu to a caricature of cunning and ruthlessness, we rob ourselves of the opportunity to learn his most valuable lessons about empathy, restraint, and the supreme value of peace. To truly honor his legacy, we must rescue his philosophy from the boardroom and the battlefield, and return it to its proper place as a profound meditation on how to navigate a world filled with inevitable human conflict. The ultimate lesson that Sun Tzu leaves for those willing to read deeply is that the greatest victory is not over another person, an opposing army, or a competing nation, but over one's own self. He teaches us that the chaos we see in the world around us is often just a reflection of the chaos within our own minds, our unguarded emotions, our unexamined biases, and our undisciplined desires. True power, according to this ancient wisdom, is not the ability to impose your will on others through force, but the ability to maintain your own center and clarity regardless of the external circumstances. By understanding the mechanics of conflict, we are better equipped to de-escalate tension in our marriages, our workplaces, and our communities before they spiral into destructive fights. He invites us to become strategists of our own lives, anticipating challenges before they arise, understanding the people around us deeply, and maneuvering through life with grace rather than aggression. The supreme art of living is to achieve your goals in a way that leaves the fewest scars on yourself and on those around you, turning potential enemies into allies whenever possible. Sun Tzu is not telling us how to fight better. He is begging us to think better, to feel more deeply, and to recognize the horrific stupidity of violence as a solution to human problems. If you finish reading The Art of War and feel an urge to go out and start a conflict, you have read the words but missed the music. You have seen the tactics but missed the Tao. The final wisdom is that the invincible warrior is the one who has cultivated such profound situational awareness and inner peace that conflict simply dissolves in their presence before it can ever take root. In a world still addicted to the illusion of force, Sun Tzu remains a quiet, ancient voice whispering a timeless truth. The only sane way to win a war is to prevent it from ever happening. If you find value in these deep dives into history and philosophy that challenge the way we think about the past, please consider subscribing to the channel and clicking the bell icon so you never miss our newest documentary episodes. Hitting the like button and sharing this video with friends or colleagues who appreciate thoughtful, cinematic content really helps us continue producing these high-quality narratives for you. We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. How do you apply Sun Tzu's philosophy of winning without fighting in your own modern daily life?